The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello there, and welcome to today's workshop, where we're going to be talking about unlocking the value of your retail data to drive true business growth. My name is Chris Attewell, and I'm CEO of Search Laboratory, and I'm joined today by David Howlett, who in his role as Data Solutions Architect, works with our clients to help identify ways to use data and technology to improve the performance of the digital campaign. What we're going to be covering today, we have these points to run through with you. So firstly, looking at how we can help realign your digital marketing to the real KPIs that drive business growth, how to break through kind of growth plateau that you're experiencing, incorporate first-party data to build a profit-focused growth strategy, how to define a roadmap to increase your digital maturity, and then how to build a foundation that enables a profitable return on your digital marketing budget. A few housekeeping points first of all. So the webinar will last around 30 minutes. We do have some time scheduled for questions at the end, so please do submit any questions you have via the chat function on the right, and we'll be happy to pick those up later. For those who aren't familiar with Search Laboratory, so we are an integrated digital marketing and technology company, and we're passionate about searching for the truth in data to help our clients grow. Our purpose in life as a company is to connect the best digital talent and technology, and we do that to enable the world's most ambitious companies to win. There are two really important parts to that. The first part being people. We employ a team of 150 incredibly talented people between offices in the UK, New York, and Austin, Texas. And we're really proud to have featured in the Times newspaper as one of the top 100 UK companies to work for in 8 of the past 10 years. And then the other part of what we do is technology. So we develop our own technology. We also work closely with leading tech partners like Facebook and Google to make sure we're maximizing the value our clients get from using their platforms. And specifically relevant to the topic of this workshop, we're one of a handful of Google Marketing Platform sales partners. So that means we work closely with the Google team on supporting clients across their premium analytics and ad tech stack. That's predominantly Google Analytics 360, but also Search Ads 360, Display and Video, and Campaign Manager, as well as working in Google Cloud Platform with BigQuery on advanced data projects. So before we get into it and I hand over to Dave, I guess I wanted to give a bit of background on today's topic of discussion. So some people may be familiar with the work that Google have been doing with Boston Consulting Group around digital maturity over the past few years. BCG, Boston Consulting Group, carried out some research in 2018, working with a large group of advertisers from around the world to analyze their digital marketing campaigns and assess their level of maturity and use of data, while also looking at the impact of that use of data and maturity on campaign performance. They then subsequently revisited the same study in 2021 to update their findings and insights. And as part of that process and that study, they established this 4-tier framework for measuring an advertiser's digital and data maturity based on a range of different factors. And they call these 4 stages nascent, emerging, connected, and multi-moment, with the first 2 on the left representing a low level of digital maturity, and the second 2 on the right a high level of maturity. As you can see in 2018, around 90% of companies at that time sat in those middle 2 tiers, while only 2% of companies were fully digitally mature at that time. If we then fast forward to 2021, we can see that not only have more companies moved up into that top tier, into that multi-moment tier, but there's also been a 30% increase in the number of companies who now sit in the high maturity bracket. But why is all of this important? Well, to get on to the interesting part, what they found from these studies was that those companies in the high maturity tier, so in those two right-hand segments, were able to increase their revenue by an average of 18% while achieving a reduction in spend of 29%. So really, really good results for companies that have invested and who've gone on that digital maturity journey. One thing that we found through working with clients is, while you can look at the different stages and aim for that multi-moment top tier, the path towards digital and data maturity can be long, or it can appear long. It can be complicated, and it can appear to be expensive and be expensive in reality. And yes, if you sat in that lower nascent tier, you're probably looking at what you need to do to reach the top tier, and it is a lot of work and probably a significant investment to get there. But it's not about shooting for the stars and becoming fully digitally mature overnight. We advise that it's a process that can take time. And most importantly, it's about assessing where you are now and determining what the next best action is. What can you be doing tomorrow that's going to be better than you're doing today? And it's about achieving incremental uplift in performance by improving what you're doing with data as part of a longer term journey with a roadmap towards digital maturity. So I guess now is probably a good time to hand over to David, who's going to share some practical advice on some of the ways in which you can do this.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off with the fundamental business questions that we see getting asked a lot, both from our clients and also internally within them. First one being, how can we invest more to grow? And the second one being, what should our target be? And these two questions feed each other. If you're running at a 500% ROAS target, for example, you'll find that you can spend up to that point, and then actually increasing investment to grow becomes challenging. So then the conversation leads to, how do we change that target in the first place? And I guess really the theme of this webinar is to show that these aren't the right questions to ask. The real question that you should be asking is, how much profit do I make? For every £1 I spend, how much profit do I get back from that? And does that profit change if it's a new or existing client, or if it's product A versus product B? And once you start getting onto using your data to actually bring profit into everything you do within digital marketing, it's a lot easier to then go back and answer the question of, well, how much should we be investing to grow, and what should that target be? Because the target gets defined by, well, what does break even look like, and how much do you want to be over that? So we'll be covering these as we go through, but this is fundamentally what we're trying to achieve here. So the reason we're trying to do this is because we see a lot of clients come to us, and they're on this plateau where they've actually been optimizing for quite a while. Maybe they've had some really good success over the last few years, but eventually when you're only giving your digital teams revenue to work with, they're going to hit a target limit where they can't really push much more. Maybe the market's going to carry them up for a while, but you want to get off that plateau where the market's really dictating week on week how your performance looks. Now, we're not saying that you won't end up back on a plateau like this, but the goal of digital maturity is to extend it as far as we can until you reach that plateau again. So with that in mind, Chris mentioned the Boston Consultant Group, and I've fleshed out that digital maturity framework in a bit more detail so you can sort of understand where you currently are and start building that that roadmap to get somewhere where you want to be. We find a lot of businesses are currently at this stage, really at the nascent stage, where they're focused on single channel performance. More often than not, they're on last click. Sometimes they're on first click, but either way, that there's actual massive limitations around that we'll come on to in a bit. And fundamentally, they're optimizing their marketing campaigns towards revenue, and that revenue value doesn't change based on which product, for example. So, £10 of product or $10 of product A is the same as $10 of product B. But really, the whole purpose of this webinar is to show you guys how you can start moving into the emerging category and beyond. In emerging, we're not trying to solve an attribution issue at this stage, because attribution isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is profit and lifetime value. So understanding what the value of a new customer is, how that changes based on the behaviors they exhibit, what they purchase, for example, and bringing that into your digital channels so that you can confidently say how much you should be investing and what those targets should be. Once you're at that stage, it makes total sense to actually get to a point where now you start attributing that profit. You don't want to try and solve attribution first before you've even solved how much money you're turning over from a digital perspective. And to do this, we reach a point where we need to build a data warehouse. That essentially means bringing your CRM data, your GA, your various channel data all into one place, and obviously you'd want to have your margins as well and deliveries, etc., in there. And this gives you a much more connected view, particularly if you've got stores, for example, or there's a load of offline activity that happens over phones, for example. This allows you to join that whole user journey together, because it's really important that we establish that a user journey is not the few clicks it took to get to the first purchase, but it's every purchase that happens after that and all the touch points that happen in between those purchases. There's a concept of a lot of digital marketing strategies are really focused on just getting that sale in, but they're not focused necessarily on, well, how do you nurture that sale to six purchases this year, for example? And obviously that's really important within retail in particular. The last stage here is what we call omni-channel, behavior-driven. Essentially, you've got all your data in one place, and that opens up some really powerful machine learning opportunities that you can employ. Where essentially you score every user who's ever having a touch point with you, whether or not it's offline, in store with an e-receipt, for example, or on GA itself, on the website itself. And we'll come on to this in more detail, but it enables you to actually start building audiences, targeting people based on their behaviors rather than based on trying to join up a transaction. So what we end up with is these 4 sections that we want to cover. First off, we start off on the left-hand side here, the first one being singular product value, and that's really saying, let's get to a point where we could say, today, this is how much profit we made. For every transaction that went through the website, this is after delivery, margins, expected returns, this is how much money we think we've made against how much we've spent. The next stage to that is to then say, okay, then well, how many of them were new customers, or from our existing customers, how has their lifetime value prospects changed? How much more profit do we think we're going to drive on a 6-month, 12-month, 2-year cycle from that new customer or existing customer? And a key part of that is cross sales. You know, if someone buys 2 products in their basket versus 1, how does that change their lifetime value? And overall, how do these stats change by product type? Because that's something that we find every time we look into doing this for our clients. We find fundamentally you can sort of pin your customers based on what products they're actually purchasing, and it does change their value. Once we've done that, that's when we go on to, well, how do we attribute this to new customer sources, and how do we bring behavioral insights into that? So to kickstart things, obviously this is not our client data, this is sort of extrapolated data for the purpose of running through the webinar, but it's actually not too dissimilar to what we see. I mean, every client is different, but the same themes sort of follow throughout. In this example, what we've done is we've grouped up our PPC campaigns into dresses, t-shirts, etc. And I'm sure that for your PPC accounts, they're probably in a similar sort of structure, depending on which products that you're selling. And more often than not, you've got one product category that is sort of leading the charge, a bit higher ROAS, more revenue behind it, and you've got other product categories that are maybe falling behind targets, but maybe you need to keep pushing money through because you think they're loss leaders, or you've got stock that you need to get rid of, for example. And where this typically leads is you'll have a digital strategy that says we need a blended ROAS target of 500%, and let's make sure PPC is delivering that. And the digital team will then say, okay, well, let's invest more in dresses, let's pull a bit out of sandals, and let's try and balance the whole thing out to 500% as best we can. And we know from looking at the data that's just fundamentally not how profit aligns. Quite often you'll find that your most profitable campaigns might actually be much lower ROAS, and you'll see that as we move through. Now, the first step to getting you there is to bring your margin data in. And there's a really key element here, and that's that margin numbers can look they can look like they're quite insignificant differences. The difference between 35% and 25% margin doesn't seem like a lot, but we have to stress that actually that's a 40% increase in profit when you're driving sales from a 35% margin compared to a 25% margin product. And you want your digital teams to be aware of this, to understand fundamentally what is driving your business growth. And this stretches out to lifetime value and all sorts of different KPIs there. Another thing that's really important is the impact of delivery and discounts. Now, I've not included delivery and discounts in this just to kind of simplify the webinar, but when we do this, we take that into account. And what you'll find is that you might start off with a product that has a 30% margin, but because it's a product that you always give free delivery on, it's a product that you quite often do discounts on, maybe through affiliates, that 30% margin can quickly tank all the way down to 13% or 15%. And We've seen this in real life situations with clients where the PPC team are driving the majority of their revenue through products that actually lose money. We can spend millions of dollars there and not make any profit off the back of it, simply because the strategy does not account for how big an impact delivery and discounts can have. So it's really important that you also calculate essentially what your true margins are after those are factored in. Once you've done that, you end up in a stage where straight away now you've got profit and ROI, and you can calculate this down to a keyword level if you wanted. So, and this isn't just limited to PPC. You know, from an organic search perspective, you can see, well, how does profit change based on landing pages? So you should be optimizing your entire digital strategy against profit, not revenue at this point. And all it's taken to do that really is getting a list of SKUs and their costs and joining them to GA, where obviously you have SKU there for every sale that goes through. So it's not overly complicated to achieve. In this example, once you've done this, you'll actually find, in this case, that t-shirts is where we should be optimizing our budget. So from a PPC perspective, if you were to give them a 500% ROAS target, they wouldn't actually be investing more into t-shirts here. But in reality, that's exactly where they should be putting their money. The next stage to this, particularly within retail, is returns, and particularly within the fashion industry, they can be pretty brutal. So, for example, in dresses, we're modeling out a 50% return rate. And that can quickly actually lead you to a point where you've got negative returns on your investments here. And this is a business decision at this point. If lifetime value is not a big aspect of the products you sell, maybe you're selling quite expensive products that are sort of one-off time purchases, they don't have a lot of lifetime value behind them. Then you reach a point where you have to change your pricing strategy. And to do that, you actually calculate the break-even ROAS targets for all your various campaigns. And then it's a conversation of, well, can we even hit that break-even ROAS? Because if we can't, we have to either not advertise that product or change our pricing strategy, change our delivery strategy maybe around that. And that has happened as a result of doing these projects for clients, where it's been a bit of an eye-opener for them. They saw loads of revenue coming through certain campaigns, but actually they were losing money as a result of that. And it's insight that is just completely obscured. If you're only focused on revenue, you'll always tend towards the products that actually may be losing you money as a result of that. So we've reached a point now where we've calculated our break-even ROAS targets, but if in the case of dresses in this example, we know there's a lifetime value there. If we're selling dresses, we're actually hoping for them to purchase maybe 4 or 5 times a year. So it's not the be-all and end-all that it's currently at negative ROI. Moving on to the last step here, and that's where we actually do calculate lifetime value. And what we quite often find is that once we've actually implemented lifetime value, there's a lot of avenues where we can be investing. So to go back to the first question of, well, how much should I be investing? The conversation now becomes around, well, what horizon are we looking at? Are we investing for this week and this week's performance? Well, let's stick to profit on the transaction. But if we want to grow the business, we want to drive new customers through, and we want to get the most valuable new customers, well, then we're going to be looking at lifetime value on 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. And that might mean that actually dresses is the place where we want to put the majority of our spend, because that maybe has the biggest market share for us to actually go after. But in the short term, maybe we're going to go after t-shirts and hoodies there, because in a 6-month window, that drives the money for this year's targets. And once you've got this information, you can have conversations at a board level about how you want to invest your marketing budget, and it's backed up by profit. There's no assumptions being made here. It's actually the dollars spent and dollars made as a result of that. So we've run through how do we get profit into digital marketing, how we should be using it, and that it's very achievable to do. But what is the technical side of it? How do we actually go through the process of doing that? So I've created this diagram to show you essentially the 3 data sources that you're going to want to get hold of, and you want to put them into what I'm calling a centralized data warehouse. And first of all, don't start off trying to automate this. That's where the cost comes in. As a business, you want to take a single snapshot of data and say, how would that change my view of my digital marketing strategy if I could see lifetime value and profit against my last 6 months of spend, say, against all the different campaigns, the different landing pages for organic search. And you'll find that you'll be able to pivot your business strategy off the back of that straight away. And then maybe you want to do it again in 3 months' time and check to see how has it changed. And only at that point should you then be thinking, okay, then there's a load of value behind you. I can create a dashboard that actually tells me profit every day from my PPC campaigns. That's when you go down the automation route, and obviously it's a bit more expensive, but you've proven the business case. You've actually driven more growth off the back of it, so it's an easy cost to go for at that point. So in terms of the actual three things going in here, we've got GA channels, GA and channel performance, Facebook, Google Ads, Bing, etc. We recommend Google BigQuery for this because they natively connect really well with Google BigQuery. No surprise, given it's a Google product. It's very easy to use. It's incredibly powerful, but it's not the only solution. You could use things like Azure instead. I've seen many clients try and push their platform data into their CRM instead, where all their order lines are. And at first glance, it sounds like a good idea. You could update your email strategy as a result of that, but it's actually really cumbersome. It doesn't open up the benefits of cloud-based solutions with regards to behavioral modeling, and fundamentally the GA data set alone from GA4 and GA360 is huge, and you won't easily fit that into your CRM. So the solution is actually to move the CRM instead and extract the information that matters. Not all of the information, but the things that matter into the centralized data warehouse. And lastly, you've got supplemental feeds, and this might be things like a list of every product SKU and the cost of those products. And you can just drop that into a Google sheet and have Google BigQuery read that, save that, store it, and use it. So it's a really flexible way to essentially make it as painless as possible for you to update your margins when products have changed, for example, without having to redo a lot of work. So we've talked about how do we get profit into our digital strategy, what we have to actually do, how we have to join that data together. The next step is to say, okay, then, well, we've now built a data warehouse. We're at the point where we want to automate it. We've shown that there's value to the business. It's helping us grow because we're looking at profit now. So now let's try and attribute that data to new customer sources and start putting a value on some of those behaviors. And to really give you an example of why we do that, why it's really important, I wanted to run you through what a typical customer journey might look like, and to show you really what it looks like from a multiple sale perspective. So the first touch point, we always like to start at the top of the funnel. It might be that someone came through a Facebook prospecting ad, and the key thing here is that they viewed multiple products. If they came through a Facebook prospecting ad and just bounced off the homepage, for example, then that wasn't the right person. That's not a behavior that we want to go after. But if they viewed multiple products, what they're essentially doing is it's the same thing as if you had a storefront and you had some banners in the windows of your storefront and people looked at them and came through and viewed your products. That's the whole purpose of that activity, and it's the number one behavior we want to see, and we can put a value on that very easily, and we'll come back to that in a bit. The next stage here in this person's life user journey is that they came through PPC Generic and they signed up to a newsletter, and this is gold dust. Anytime when we can collect an identifiable piece of information about a user, you absolutely must do it. You must store that information because what that means is we've now got that client ID against that email address, and when they purchase 3 years from now for their 10th purchase, we still know they had this PPC Generic session, and any sessions that we can connect up to it as well if the cookie remained. The next step, after sign up for the newsletter, we used that email address and we went after them with Facebook. We remarketed to them. And what we quite often find with social media is that they will add to cart. You'll see that a lot, actually, when you look at the stats if you're tracking it. You get a lot of add to carts through social media. They'll go through to the checkout, so they've gone past that point. They've actually given you a few details about themselves, but they don't purchase. And to a lot of businesses, that looks like lost money. It didn't work, it's not the right media. But actually, what that is a broken user journey, because what's happening is when someone comes through a social media platform, the browser opens up within that social media platform. It's not the same cookies. It's actually a completely different set of cookies to if they went through their normal browser. So that's a completely disjointed user journey. But because they've gone through the checkout, they've actually given you their email address again. So if you're storing that information and you create what's called a soft login, you could join that user journey all the way back up through the rest of that user journey's life. So lastly, in this little scenario here, they finally purchased through direct. And if you're using first click, you probably would have seen it come through PPC Generic. And if not, you probably saw it come through direct as a sale and you didn't see any value against Facebook. But that isn't where that user journey ends. They come back through PPC shopping, again, viewing products. It's when we look at our clients' data, we can see that it's the product browsing behaviors that really indicate the value of that customer. And then they purchase again through organic search and then again through direct. So what we've got here is we've got one customer 3 sales, but from GA's perspective, it's 5 different users. So 5 different users purchased 3 times. And that really shows you why it doesn't really matter if you're using first click, last click. It's very wrong until you've actually joined this data up properly. And once you have joined the data up properly, it's not a simple case of just putting a few weightings on channels. It's about using machine learning to actually say, well, what behaviors happened across those channels? And we can see the products reviewed twice, and we can put a value on that. That might be £2 for every person who viewed X, Y, and Z, and it might be £10 if they viewed a different set of products, for example. Now, I've highlighted user 2 here with these 2 arrows, and that's really showing you the impact of that dropped Facebook cookie there, where we end up attributing to user 2 either on PPC generic or direct, and the Facebook element was completely lost. Now, there are some solutions to getting around this. GA4 is a massive part of this. This is Google's solution to going cookieless. And essentially what they're doing is they're gathering a lot of information on everyone if you're logged into YouTube, Gmail, Google, etc. And they're using these signals to join these user journeys up. But the soft login and the data warehousing there is absolutely crucial. Every time you get an identifiable piece of information, which could be a store receipt as well, it's really valuable that you join that up. Consent mode, a GA4 side of things, allowing you to actually model data better as well and join up some of those broken journeys. And lastly, we have the estimated value modeling. Really where estimated value modeling comes in is it says we know that some of these journeys are broken, but we're gonna analyze millions of permutations of users to still value the journeys that are broken anyway, so that we can put a value right at the top of that user journey and optimize our Facebook prospecting essentially towards an ROI on profit as a result of that. So to kind of summarize where we're up to right now, we've said, okay, we need to join the user journeys at every identifiable touch point. We've identified why that's such an important thing to be doing. The next step is to then push that information back into the platforms themselves. We work with quite a few businesses where you might have an analytics team that's come up with a figure saying, okay, we need to drive 30% more new customers. We need to spend $30 for every new customer. But none of that information is pushed through into the platforms. If a transaction happens on your website and you don't know if it's a new or existing customer, there's no way for your digital marketing team to actually optimize to that element of your business growth. And then they get stuck on just optimizing towards revenue as a result of that. So the last element of that is that predictive modeling. We're going to come on to that in just a second. What is behavior modeling? So like I mentioned, we're using machine learning to analyze millions of permutations. You can kind of think of it in terms of nodes. One of those nodes might be here's 100,000 people that went to the homepage and then went to product A versus product B, or it might be that they picked up the phone, or they had another journey where they came for a remarketing touch point. It could be you can define a touch point in any way, but the fundamental thing that we're doing here is we're changing that value on that user based on the actions they take during their touch points and the distance between them as well. If someone doesn't come back to the website for 3 months, but that's what they normally do and they normally purchase after 3 months, well, then there's value to that and you need to understand that. As a result of this, what you're actually doing is you're not trying to solve the usual attribution problem of here's a transaction, try and spread that value out over the previous touch points. Instead, what you're actually doing is you're valuing users before they purchase. They might only be worth $3 before they purchased, but then also after as well, because as we mentioned, a transaction is a touch point. So if someone's been purchasing from you for 3 years, we're still modeling out their expected value on a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month cycle. And that's really powerful for the business. It's telling you the value of your pipeline of all your existing customers and the value pipeline of all your soon-to-be customers or all the traffic that you're driving to your store. And as a result of that, that means that you're optimizing towards a predicted lifetime value, or more importantly, a predicted profit, not a ROAS. You've got completely off the revenue side of things now, and you've got one KPI that you can optimize the your entire business pipeline, essentially. So to go into that in a little bit more detail, what that actually means is that when you're scoring users, it means you can also derive audiences. Here's 10,000 people who are worth $6 compared to 5,000 people who are worth $2. And you can feed that into your email strategies, your remarketing lists, etc. It goes into everything. Optimization and bidding is obviously a key part of that, but it completely changes based on attribution. We've completely gone away from optimizing towards a transaction, and now we're valuing just every session, and it's a summation of the value of all the sessions coming through for a particular channel. And lastly, you've got the projections and forecast side of things, the ability for you as a business to say, this is how we did this week, but this is how we actually expect to do this week next year as well. This is an example of just what it looks like when you actually switch your business towards optimizing towards behaviors. This might be a singular user who's come through, they went to the homepage, which meant they were worth 50 cents, but as they've gone through various pages and had various touch points, that value has changed as a result of that. And this is what it looks like. So to sum this up and put it into actionable boxes, really, for you to understand exactly where you are and define those next stages for you to go on the roadmap of digital maturity for your business. If we redefine the foundation as saying, well, let's switch you to profit. Let's build those KPIs around lifetime value, margin, delivery, etc. Let's put ourselves in a position where for every transaction that goes through GA, we actually know how much profit we made. That's a foundational step that we want to achieve. The next step is to say, well, we don't want to build a data warehouse right now, but we know there's behaviors that are happening at the top of the funnel, such as viewing multiple products, that we want to put a commercial value on. And we can absolutely do that. And as a result of that, you can now switch your prospecting away from trying to hit a transaction that it will probably never really achieve and towards behaviors that matter. The next stage is where you say, okay, then we've gone as far as we can. We've gotten off that plateau, but now we need to build a data warehouse. Now we need to start attributing value throughout that user journey and start using predictive modeling and machine learning. And that brings you on to valuing every touch point, online, offline, tracking those predicted values of a customer. If you think a customer is worth $6, you can track that over throughout the course of their lifetime and actually check if you were right or not. And that really summarizes everything I wanted to run through with this webinar. I'll hand over to Chris now just to wrap up.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much, Dave. If we could just, okay, go on to the next slide. So yeah, I guess before we get into the summary of the key takeaways, I just wanted to revisit this this slide here where we talked about the you know, the impact of implementing some of these processes and being able to make more of your customer data. It really is beneficial. You know, those companies that have gone on this journey and have embraced leveraging their data are really outperforming companies that haven't. So yeah, I guess the main takeaways that I have from this would be, you know, profitable growth is a challenge. It's very competitive, as you all know. You know, retail in general is competitive. Click prices are increasing, and actually, what we find working with retail clients and all clients in particular really is, you know, once you get to that top tier, once you get to be, you know, a larger advertiser, you go in head to head with other large advertisers who, generally speaking, are pretty good at what they do. You know, they'll have good in-house teams running their advertising, or they may be working with agencies who will be good agencies, and you know, their campaigns will be optimized. You know, everybody's campaigns are fairly well optimized. So, you know, you're not gonna stand out from the crowd by just being well optimized within your digital channels. What we want to work on with clients is breaking out of that. You know, if there's a ceiling there of optimization, how do we help clients break through that ceiling? And it really is through unlocking the value of your data that you can break through that ceiling and outperform competitors. And as we've seen, you know, those companies that have done that are outperforming the competition. So yeah, one of the main takeaways, I mean, obviously we've given you some practical tips on how to do that. I'll just come back to a point that I made earlier, which is it really is a process. We're not advising that all of a sudden you know, you jump towards the top tier and you expect that you know, as of tomorrow, using predictive lifetime value to impact your digital campaigns. It's a journey. I would advise setting out a roadmap and understanding where you want to get to, but just doing something better tomorrow, or doing, implementing some use of data tomorrow that's better than you're doing today, will show short-term incremental gains. And if you continue to use that approach and move through the framework, you'll continue to see those incremental gains. Where people are quite often put off by this process, as I've said, is by, aiming for the stars, and then being put off by the complexity or the cost or whatever it may be. And then, it tends to fall flat from there. So yeah, I think that's in terms of takeaways, that kind of wraps it up. We do have some time for questions. There are a few that I can see have been sent through. I'll start with the first one around which are the main challenges that you encounter when working with clients to implement data solutions. So yeah, I'll pick that one up quickly. One of the main challenges that we've come across is really when clients are siloed internally in the way that they structure their business. So, data and leveraging customer data needs to be a business-wide, top-down initiative. Where we found that it falls down is where you have, a digital marketing team or an e-commerce team who are trying to run a project using customer data, and inevitably that project is going to require input or resources from IT or data or tech or whoever it may be that controls the more technical elements of the business. Conversely, we quite often see where, maybe retail clients have an IT department or a tech team or whatever it may be who've themselves begun this journey of, maximizing the customer data that they have, and they may have built solutions, and actually, while it's very, very good, and they may be working out lifetime value or predictive lifetime value or audience segments, whatever it may be, if it's been designed without the input from digital marketing, it has limitations around how that data can be used to activate across digital channels. So it really does need to be a top-down, senior C-level stakeholder sponsored project that will deliver actual results. Otherwise, as I say, from our experience, you tend to hit some blockers on one side or the other, and people lose faith, and then it tends to drop off. So that would be my biggest piece of advice in terms of overcoming those challenges. Get board level buy-in, and have it as a business-wide strategic initiative. There was another one, I think, let me pick it up, that was around, where are we? So there's a lot of, so there's so much stuff that you've been through that we could do. If there was one thing that you would suggest we start with, what would that be? And I think I'm going to hand this one over to David.
Sure. So the number one thing is get yourself in a position where you can answer the question of how much should I be investing and what should my target be? And that comes down to defining what profit looks like for your business. So those first few stages that we went through, where you're calculating profit for every transaction that goes through GA, for example, and put yourself in a position where your digital channels can now pivot and optimize towards where the profit is, not where the revenue is.
Perfect. Okay, thanks very much, David. And so yeah, there's another one around, so how do you start consolidating your data to get it into a data warehouse? It seems like a big job. So is it a big job?
It's not as big as it sounds. It can be big, but the key thing is to focus on that singular extract of data, which is definitely not usually a challenge. It might be that you don't quite know where it is in the business, but it definitely exists, and you can definitely get access to it. You then want to employ someone, either internally yourself, who understands SQL, so they can work with programs like BigQuery, or come to an agency like ourselves who have those capabilities. We've got a full data engineering team that can facilitate these services.
Perfect. Great. Thanks very much. And then I think we have time for one final one. And this is around GA4. So GA4 was mentioned as a partial solution to join in the customer journey. How does this work, and how should we be setting this up? So I guess I'll quickly start on that one, and then I'll maybe pick it up, pass it over to David. So Yeah, I'm sure everybody's aware of GA4. Hopefully most people have implemented that now. Following Google's announcement a couple of months ago that the universal version of analytics will be retired next year. So yeah, we've been pushing our clients for a long time to at least get GA4 set up. It's officially out of beta at the moment. You know, it's maybe not fully like for like with analytics as of yet, but there's a lot of work going into it. So yeah, lots of benefits of using it. Like I say, not just the fact that it's going to be the future version of it, and universal analytics is going to be retired and everybody should be on it. But as far as this specific question to how it acts as a solution for joining the customer journey, I'm going to hand over to David on that one.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential that you get your business onto GA4 because it's Google's solution to dealing with a cookieless world, which is coming in the next year, really. So there's no way around it. It's the best solution that you can employ. Yes, we still recommend that you go down the route of introducing things like soft logins because there's things that GA4 will just not cope with in the same way. But it's all part of the parcel, and you have to do it as a big part of your strategy to joining up your data.
Perfect. Okay, thanks very much. And that's all we have time for today, I think. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Thanks for your time. We are more than happy to pick up any additional questions further down the line. We've recorded the webinar. We'll be posting it on our website, and then I believe contacting everybody via email and sending out the link so you can revisit. If you do have any questions, if you'd like any advice, more than happy to pick that up with some contact details there. And like I say, we'll be in touch by email afterwards. But yeah, thanks again. Thanks for your time. Hopefully you found that useful, and enjoy the rest of your day.